Well, my kind of feeling was, well, let's go down burning. You know, I mean, clearly, I had a choice at that stage. I could not stay in South Africa, continuing to work for SABC. I could not stay in South Africa and be, you know, the kind of useless white kid of which there were so many. Capital Radio kind of gave a way in which I never saw us as activists. I just saw us as people who were given the opportunity to do honest journalism, which some, certainly in government, might have regarded as activism, but which I never did, and very few of the people there did see it as activism. The difference between working at SABC and working at Capital Radio was simply there were no controls apart from what should be controls in any proper news organization, which are the same in any news organization today as they were then. That is impartiality, fairness, equity. I've never been one for absolute objectivity. I don't think that any news organization, even the best, can or indeed should be. But I still think that the whole issues of fairness, of equity, of everybody having the right to their say, all those kind of principles are fundamentals of news, but which were basically banned or outlawed within a system like that of the SABC, but became the bedrock on which the news format that we evolved in Capital Radio was based. We started off what should be the basic principles of good news coverage and moved on from there. The founders of Capital Radio, I mean, Richard Bruce and John Moody, Martin Rattle. I mean, Martin ran a nightclub in Cape Town, international nightclub. But look, I wouldn't go so far as to say their motives were pure profit. That certainly there was a sense that they were going to do things differently. But the key issue was who they chose to set up the style, the structure. First of all, they based it on an existing Capital Radio 194 broadcasting in London. Secondly, they brought out a man to train everybody, both in news and in the music presenters, who was utterly rigorous in terms of honesty and in terms of if you're going to have an independent radio station, then it be an independent radio station. In other words, it's not only that it's free from government control, but it's also free from any sector or faction or party that wants to use it as an instrument to spread its own propaganda. And that was Michael Berry, or Michael Bucht. Michael Berry was his name used as running a cooking show on BBC. One of the first executive chefs, but an absolutely inspired and brilliant man who gave flesh to the concept of an independent radio station broadcasting independent music and independent news. And Michael kind of gave that a reality because he had the skills and the knowledge to give us what we were actually looking for, and to guide us to what we actually needed to get to. So that was the key. The guys, Martin, Martin was focused on the music output. Very, very smart, very good in terms of creating the type of music that he thought would be listened to. It was a commercial station. That was its whole effort. He was good in appointing people like Anthony Duke, and Anthony was truly, truly smart in terms of music trends, what music is, and importantly, what music meant in South Africa. And not necessarily seeing it as a force for political change, but seeing it as the right of everybody to make what music they wanted to and to listen to what music they wanted to. And that was the kind of essence of it. But that kind of, in a way, didn't come from the founders. It came from those who actually put the nuts and bolts of the station together, the presenters, the news people, and above all, Michael as the consultant.
Right.
So we had to create a way in which to ensure that without dictating what you do, you create what is going to be a recognized independent radio style. So in consultation with Michael Bucht, we drew up a new style guide, Beatrice Hollier, Paddy Clay, myself, Bernie Shinyani, a guy called Zahid Kachalia. We were the kind of new group of media in a way. And we drew up a style guide which was very all-encompassing, which decades on kind of looks, well, why do you have to say that? But, you have to put down in writing why you do not call people terrorists. One man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. Terrorist is much pejorative and an inaccurate term as freedom fighter is. So we use the word guerrilla, which is as middle of the road as you can get. But it was issues like that. It was, look, we had hours of discussion over whether you call it the trans guy or trans guy. Trans guy is giving it a state which legally, let alone what we personally believe, legally is clearly incorrect. That trans guy meant it's a neighborhood without the trappings of state, so we called it that trans guy. I don't think the powers that be ever really kind of got onto the subtleties of that particular one, but it was there in black and white in our style guide if they cared to look. But it was a very important process because for the first time in South Africa you had a group of people transforming the very structure on which media worked. And for the first time you had it being put down of this is what independent news should all be about. This is what it means. We've lived in a society for decades in which the concept of independent media, the concept of independent music, of independent art is completely non-existent. You had a situation in which it was state-sanctioned or it was resistance. Somehow you had to get something in the two if you were ever going to have a true democracy emerge from the apartheid ashes. And that's where the process began in that tiny newsroom at Capital Radio, in creating some kind of template that looked forward to a society in which people would be free and in which news would be independent without you having to work it to be so. Not necessarily saying that stage has been reached now in a post-apartheid government. The struggle still goes on, and that's why what we did then is so important and so relevant to what is happening in South Africa today.